Hey guys, welcome to Code Decode. In this video, we are going to look into top microservices interview questions 2026 edition. Now, 90% of the enterprise level applications are on microservices. So the interview questions have also migrated from what is microservice, how do you migrate from monolith to microservices to a new kind of interview pattern, which is the data ownership part, the boundaries, the contexts, how do you migrate the databases in microservices and all such kinds of trickier questions. So let's see only the trickier part in this particular video. Let's get started. A very first tricky part is how is the data ownership maintained in microservices and who is the data owner of a microservice. The data ownership means that each microservice is an exclusive owner of a specific set of data. Too much of theory? Let me make you understand with an example. Suppose you have an e-commerce website, you have an order service, customer service, and payment service. Then the customer details, when only and only will be written and modified and handled in the structure and validation rules and constraint, only and only by the customer microservice. The order microservice can only show the customer details by giving a hit to the customer microservice, but will never directly interact with the database, which is a customer database. So the data ownership means that each microservice, that is a customer microservice, is an exclusive owner of the customer data. Only customer microservice will then be able to write and modify the customer data, decide the structure and tables of these customer data, validation rules of customers, and constraints. The order microservice or payment microservice can only get the customer details. That too through the APIs or Kafka or the asynchronous events, but never directly through the database. So if in an interview you say that your customer order service, these two interact with the same common database, that is an anti-design pattern in a microservice. Remember that. The interview will then and there know that you will never understand the basics of the microservice. So this is a basic rule that your customer microservice can only handle the customer profile data, write it, modify it. The other microservice can only access this using synchronous or asynchronous calls. The synchronous calls will be usually through gRPCs or REST APIs, the asynchronous one through the subscribing to the events and keeping the local copies like the Kafka and the ActiveMQs, RabbitMQs. The order service will only handles the order details. The payment only handles the payment transactions. So if two services needs the same data, suppose order needs to show the customer details, then it has to interact either with the synchronous or asynchronous way. This leads to eventual consistency for sure. There is no high consistency here, but there is a low coupling, which is the best part. So breaking the data ownership with multiple microservices makes the schema change extremely risky and kills the independent deployability. And hence it is very important that you keep the data ownership with one single individual microservice only. Never share the data across multiple microservices. Access them through APIs or the events. The second trickier part is what is distributed transaction and how do you implement it without 2PC or 3PC. Now, whenever the distributed transaction comes into your mind, the first thing you see is the 2PC and 3PC. But without 2PC, 3PC, it is very important because 2PC and 3PCs are slow. It is blocking calls. It is hard to scale and deploy. And there's a tight coupling between services. So a distributed transaction. Now, what is distributed transaction? When multiple microservices or database participates in a single operation. For example, place order. What multiple operations will be required and what multiple microservices will be involved? The inventory microservice to reserve the inventory, the payment microservice for taking the payment from the clients, and the order microservice for creating the order record in the database. The two PCs have multiple issues, and instead of that, now the new microservice design comes with the Saga design pattern with choreography and orchestrator design pattern. Yes, we have already covered the orchestrator and choreography, but for the quick revision, the choreography is where each service listens to the event, produces the further event. There is no central coordinator. So it's like multiple microservices interact with each other through a common queue. For example, the order microservice publishes the order created event. The payment microservice listens to the order created event, changes its own status to take the payment from the client. Once the payment is taken, it sends an event, payment is completed or payment is failed. On the basis of that, if the payment is completed, a stock is reserved and it says inventory has been reserved successfully, and then only order service marks this as order confirmed. So these four microservices interact with each other through queues, and each microservice actively listens to each of the event and waits. If this is the event that E wants, then only the order's event structure is changed. The second one is the orchestrator design pattern, which is much better than the choreography for the higher level of one, where there is a proper central orchestrator who orchestrate everything. So it is the one who places the order. It also charges the amount. It also reserves the inventory and also marks it as confirmed. So one orchestrator does everything. And that's what an orchestrator task is, to come in between, handle everything inside, and these different microservices will be auto-wired into it. When there's an exception, the compensation part is also done by orchestrator, that release the inventory, refund the payment, and mark the order as cancelled as some exception has been occurred. So that's the beauty of the orchestrator here, who controls overall process, and orchestrator is the one who sends and listens to the responses and sends the commands. The compensation is the key here, because instead of rolling back, you perform the compensation actions. That is, you create a refund, you releases the inventory or increases it by +2 or +3, and mark the order as cancelled, which was initially was in draft state. So this is the compensation is the key part of the Saga design pattern. The third very important part, and interview question I've seen a lot of time nowadays being asked, is what is an idempotent API in the microservice and how do you design one? So an API is said to be idempotent if multiple requests still have the same effect as a single request. Too much of theory, let's understand with an example. Suppose now you have a e-commerce website. Now you have created an order. Now the second thing is you will be asked to create the payment. There is a payment API. You try to create a payment, but the network issue causes the timeout and the user is given a timeout exception, but the amount is deducted for him. So now your request API or the payment API should not take the charges twice for one single order. It should be idempotent. That means if the payment is already taken and an object is created in the database, then do not take the charge again for the same order. Don't ask for the twice payment. Rather, start from where you have left. And that is what this idempotent API is. That is, when even if you by mistake creates the two identical requests, you should not be charged twice. It should have the same effect as a single request. But now you would ask me, how would you design it? Because these are, we always know that the REST APIs and all these things are sessionless. They will not remember you. So how do you make this idempotent? The way to design this idempotent is using the idempotency key or the request ID from the client. So what you do is, let's understand with this with an example. There's a payment request which is coming in. Now for this payment request, you get the request ID. And then in your payment repository, check whether this request ID is already present. If it is present, start from there only. You send the response, okay, you made the charge. There was some network issue. I was not able to give you response properly. But I have the database entry for your particular payment ID and or the transaction ID. So this is a response. Your order is successfully placed with this. If not, that means your money has never reached your account and there was no transaction or no database entry created. Then you have to create a new payment, ask for the new amount to be taken from the client, set the key, set the amount, set it as success and save it in the repository. That now your payment is successful. Initially your amount was also not deducted. My account was also not credited and my database entry was not created. And that is how you create an idempotent API. You make the snapshot of the current scenario in the database, and that is very important in enterprise level applications. You will see everywhere we are trying to create after every transaction a snapshot in database so that it is resilient and the rollback is easy. So idempotency is critical for payments, order creations, and external integration systems with retries. Now again, a very important question: how do you handle versioning? 90% of the interviews asks this. So changes are inevitable. You must evolve your API without breaking the existing consumer. Suppose you have a web customer and you have a mobile customer. Now the web customers still wanting to have the orders to be fetched in the V1 fashion. But the mobile application wants to evolve. It wants the orders to be given in the JSON format rather than the XML format. Then you will create the second API with V1 and V2. So the web application still starts getting the order details in XML. The another evolved APIs, that is web APIs, the mobile APIs will start getting the order details in the JSON format. And that is how you create the versioning. You give them two different REST API URLs. The second is the header based versioning. Suppose header is like this. You can say the header like, now I just want data in the version of 1 or version of 2. Now using this header version, you can decide which particular API to be called. You can use API gateway also here, where you understand what is the header which is required, and then you navigate to the proper REST API or the proper microservice based on that. The third way of versioning is by accepting the header with the version media type. For example, I want V2 JSON or V1 kind of JSON. So these are the three ways of versioning. The key principle in both all of these three are that you make the changes backward compatible. That is, even if you move to the second version of JSON provision of the order details, you should not manipulate the web customers and provide them JSONs. They will fail, that they will say, I am not able to parse the JSON, I still understand only XML details of the orders. So make sure you are backward compatible, you don't break your older customers. Avoid breaking fields like removing or changing without any deprecation strategy. We will see this in the next question. Allow older and new versions to coexist for some times until everybody is not migrated, and then only deprecate the older one and communicate deprecations clearly to the consumer. Never version only and only for APIs. Also try to version for database, event schemas, and DTOs, because they are also the reason for your breaking changes. Now, a very important question in similar fashion is, how do you manage the database schema with zero downtime? You have always heard about the zero downtime of deployments of microservices. You might come as a tricky question in an interview question, that how do you manage database schema with zero downtime? So you cannot change the database in a breaking way when multiple different versions depends upon it. For example, you have a table with a name and a full name. Now your full name you want to rename to the name only, because it's an extra column which is added to your database. So you want to add a new column name and remove the full name, but you cannot do it directly because multiple APIs will be referring to this particular database. So if you delete it at once, the APIs will fail, saying, oh, I don't know the name, I know the old column that is full name. So how do you migrate from a column named as full name to a new column name called as name? So there are basically three phases: expand phase, migration phase, and contract phase. In the expand phase, what you do is you keep both full name and name into the database. So you add a new column named as name. You keep the full name also for the backward compatibility so that older APIs will not fail. The application write both full name and name simultaneously in both the columns. So yes, you will say there is a data duplicacy, but it is required for maintaining the backward compatibility. Now the older customer still uses the full name while the new customers start using the name, and both of them have the same data. How would you migrate? You would say the name will not have the older records, the 3 or 4 days older orders will not have the customer's name, it will have empty or null, that is truly there. So there is a second phase called as migration, where you backfill. What do you mean by backfill? That is the orders created before the 2 days when the new column name is added. How would name have the older customer names? Then you backfill the name with the full name for the historical data, and then deploy the new version that reads from the name. So now with the second part, with the migration, name have all the records that full name also have. So now even if you deploy with the name, even any of the consumer tries to get the older historical data, it will have all the data that the previous full name also had. The third important and the last phase is contraction phase. This contractual phase is when all consumers start using name and stop using the full name, then you stop writing to the full name also. So here what you use at the first phase, what you did is you write to both name and full name. At the third phase, when all the consumers have migrated to name, you stop writing to full name and then finally drop the full name in the later releases. This makes sure that you do not remove at the first step at all or rename at the first step. Otherwise, there's a big blunder. All your older versions will be failing. And avoid big bang migrations at once. Use the Flyway or Liquibase for versioning scripts. And log the usage of older feeds to know when it is safe to remove them. I have many more questions to cover. Why in the real-time microservices fail? What is a back pressure? What is the difference between circuit breaker, rate limiting, and bulkhead? A lot of questions I have to cover, whether for the 2026 level of questions. So just let me know in the comment section. I'll create another video for you. Thank you.